everyone, it's Sarah again. Just I wanted to follow up on some of the conversations and some of the content regarding this week's focus on asking the research questions, but more specifically looking at the whole notion about what's discussed on page 44 of your chapter readings about then how do you operationalize your research questions in a way that actually becomes a way to actually measure it and to go forth and to look at it this way. So I thought I'd build upon some of the work that I did again in my dissertation study and just give you some examples to hopefully that'll clarify the content. So just as we looked at last week, this is looking at in terms of again, the conceptual model. So these are the various constructs and concepts that I had incorporated into my dissertation research. Again, was the purpose was to look at the role of organizational power and personal influence to enable professional practice leadership to fulfill their role functions towards creating a practice environment for nurses. And these were the theoretical frameworks. So this is where they talk about now, how do you go from the research questions to the theoretical frameworks to those indicators that they refer to in terms of how do you operationalize this. So these are the theoretical frameworks that I had incorporated into my study. So I just thought I'd look at in terms of now how do we go from a theoretical framework, so how do we measure something like organizational power or professional practice leadership. So organizational power, as I mentioned last time around, is a theoretical framework developed by Cantor that really looks at, what are the various factors that go into people being effective in terms of achieving their role outcomes. So organizational power then is this construct, this very large construct, so to speak. So then how do we actually start to measure that? What are the indicators that tell us whether or not organizational power is in place or not? So Cantor had identified that there are different variables that go into that. So these are just some of them. Access to information, to supports, to resources, and to opportunities. So those are the different variables, if you will. And then as your readings talked about, these are the indicators. So what does access to information look like? Well, on this survey, using a Likert scale, they would ask, so to what degree do other people in positions like yours do their work? To what degree are you aware of what the goals of top management are? Access to support, looks at some of the indicators is, there is help in gaining access to people who can get the job done. There is help in getting materials and supplies needed to do the job. Access to resources, again, the ability to have time available to accomplish jobs. So this is just one example of where you take a very large construct, such as organizational power, look at what are some of the different variables that contribute to organizational power, and then what are then the indicators or items that would be included in survey tools that would actually you then could use to measure. So the example that I'm showing you here is actually from the work of Heather Lassinger, who was actually on my dissertation committee. She developed a tool, the CWEQ, the Conditions for Work Effectiveness, based on Cantor's theory of organizational power. So here's an example, again, as you start to look at doing your literature review, depending on the items that are the areas of interest that you may be included in your study, one of the things you're going to want to look for in your literature review is, are there any existing tools that have already been developed that can actually serve as your survey items? So here's an example of an existing tool that's been developed and has been tested for validity and reliability that you could actually incorporate into your study. If, on the other hand, you're looking at a new area that has not been researched before and there are no existing tools, then you're going to actually have to create one yourself. So that's exactly what I had to do for the professional practice leadership role construct that was central actually to my study. So as there was no tool out there, so I had to create one. So then the conversation is, so where do you get started when you're creating a brand new tool? So typically what you're going to do is look at what's the existing literature out there. Are there any, is there literature out there that kind of describes these roles? What have other people done in terms of even just describing the roles that you can pull from the literature? For my particular study here, what I actually did is I actually then gathered up as many role descriptions from different organizations of the professional practice leader roles to identify what were some of their main areas of accountability. and did a content analysis of the documents to identify what were the common themes. So these variables here along the side were kind of the common themes in terms of what were the expectations for those in the roles. And these were some of the accountability statements that were actually included in the job descriptions in terms of the expectation. So that's what I used to actually create the survey tool, where then the professional practice leaders could actually identify to what degree are they able to fulfill these role functions. So that's just another example about how you can actually utilize existing tools, or how you may need to create your own tool that looks at the difference between, what's the construct, variables, and the individual indicators that will actually allow you to now to start to look at measurement opportunities. So I just thought this might be helpful for you, as what I'm finding is the vast majority of times when you get into your different assignments, particularly assignment number 3, people do like to look at survey tools. So this might be helpful as a way of identifying if you're going to be able to use one that's already existing, or if you're going to have to create your own. So I hope you found this helpful. Looking forward to seeing your chats this week. Thanks.